Alrighty, hello, and thank you for having me back. And it's an absolute pleasure to see so many old friends here, and so many people who've been instrumental in making the program I'm going to talk about today happen. Now, fortunately, they showed me how to deal with the volume. How's that? That better? A little less echoey? Okay. Alrighty, so I have a talk, and I'm meant to go till about 4:30, is that right? Yeah. Or less. Less is good. I'm standing between you guys and beer, so yeah. I shall be so brief that I've already finished, as Salvador Dali once said. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about, and you're videoing me, so I'll stand in front of that screen. Oh, damn, that doesn't work. I'm going to talk about things that we did to try and get the number of students studying IT in Queensland to go from falling off the edge of a cliff to recovering quite nicely, which is the situation that we're in now. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about what I think the general lessons are for this that might apply to the rest of STEM education, particularly science and math education, because engineering numbers generally are not as terrifyingly disastrous as computing and math and so on numbers actually are. This is more or less the structure of the talk. So, the context. We are underproducing at least, well, actually all of STEM. It's not that we're not producing increasing numbers of engineering students, because we are. It's that the rate at which we're producing engineering students is actually well below the replacement rate that the industry is going to need. But in maths and IT, the situation is incredibly dire. Nationally, the number of people studying in those areas has been trending downwards for almost a decade. And in science, interestingly, numbers have turned up quite nicely since the government introduced a special bribe in the form of reduced tax payments, but still probably not entirely where we need. Now, in the long term, or the long term here might be 5 years, but what is the impact of this? It's basically going to reduce Australia's ability to innovate, Australia's ability to be properly entrepreneurial, and our ability to maintain a competitive economy in the long term. I'm doing a fair amount of work with our friends up the road in George Street, and I've come up with this notion of the ghost pillar. You know how they like this idea of a 4-pillar economy, and it's a very nice model for 1960, the 4 pillars that they've chosen. And it's not that those areas are not great contributors to our economy, it's that they are by and large not great employers, and becoming much worse employers every year as fields like mining and agriculture become more and more automated. And the area in there that is a great employer, tourism, doesn't exactly provide high-paying, fantastic career jobs. So I have this view that sitting out there in the mist is the ghost pillar, and the ghost pillar keeps on yielding up the next generation of jobs. 20 years ago, the ghost pillar was all about IT. It's been all about services. It's going to be all about other things over time. But it's incredibly important that an economy like Queensland's or like Australia's actively invests in the fields that are going to generate those new kinds of jobs, because those are the things that employ most of us and result in our paying good taxes and things like that over time. Or putting it another way, we should all walk around wearing a T-shirt that says, "Prove Lee Kuan Yew wrong." And if you don't know what that means, ask me afterwards in a question, and I will explain. It's also important to understand that we cannot possibly fill this hole, this cliff that we're heading to in terms of lack of indigenously produced graduates by migration. When you look at the number of migrants we have coming into this country, it's a pitiful drop in the bucket compared to the need that we will have over the next 20 or 30 years when most of our engineers, most of our IT people retire because they've just gotten too, and most of our scientists because they've just gotten too old. So this is a very, very, very serious issue. Now, to put it in number terms, the blue line is what's been happening to jobs in the IT sector since about 1999, and that data comes from the ACS Statistical Compendium. So you can see that even with the dot-com bust, the trend increase has been steadily positive, and basically in the period since 1999 to projected for 2015, we're going to double the number of people employed as IT professionals in Australia. That's from roughly 175,000 to roughly 350,000. The green line is what's happened to, is it? No, sorry, it's applications on this graph. So as you can see, the number of people studying IT in Australia has basically fallen off a cliff since about 2001. It crashed, and the numbers have just remained bobbling around at the bottom of the trough. There has been a small increase, and when we get a little further into the talk and I show you some more data, you'll see actually that small increase is a huge percentage increase in Queensland, and to a first approximation, nothing anywhere else. So, well, good for us, but not good nationally. So, more about that as we go. Now, why has this happened? I think there are a number of reasons for this, and obviously the most telling is the dot-com bust. The bottom fell out of the IT market. There's a great sense that there are no jobs, and the jobs that do exist are boring, and there's no career path for people who work in the IT industry. And basically, if you were to sum up IT in a single word, that word would be beige. Beige jobs for beige people sitting in beige offices. On top of that, of course, it's not even like a real field at all, really. It's a kind of inferior engineering or mathematics. Edsger Dijkstra is famous for having said that only bad mathematicians become computer scientists. And of course, the joke is on him, because he thought he was a good mathematician, but he became a computer scientist. So there you go, Edsger. And all of these messages are strongly reinforced by the media, by basically execrable teaching, both at universities and at school, and the familiarity breeds contempt problem. The number of times that people have said to me, but everyone uses computers now. And I say, yes, but everyone uses a kettle to boil their water for coffee in the morning, and that doesn't mean they all want to be power engineers. In fact, basically, none of them want to be power engineers, right? So just because everybody uses a technology doesn't mean they want to work in the field. This is a big mountain of problems to overcome, because it's sort of perfect stormish, right? If you're a parent and you open a newspaper, you're getting negative messages. If you're a child and you're doing IT in school, chances are you're either completely confused or bored to death. Once you get to university, and QUT, I will say, is a notable exception to this, to what I'm going to say next, and we'll talk about why that is in a moment as well. Attrition rates are incredibly high, so unis lose around half of all the students that they admit in computing or IT to start with. And so that's terrible, right? You struggle to get them through the door and then you don't keep them. That's really not where you want to be at all. So what's reality? So this is reality, and I checked these numbers this morning. Today on Seek.com there are 12,000 jobs in IT, 3.8k jobs in engineering, 3,500 jobs in mining, and 500 jobs in science. So perception and reality here really couldn't be more disconnected. So we know there are lots of jobs, we know there's lots of opportunity. The problem is getting people to recognize that this is actually something that they should be taking up. The other point, and I put it on this slide because it seemed a good place to put it, although it's not related to the numbers at all. IT is not a science, and it's not an engineering discipline either. It's a design discipline. Now, of course, there are elements of science and engineering in design, but if you think of something as a science discipline, you teach it in a kind of bottom-up, lots of theory way, which is perfectly appropriate for science, and then you hope that somewhere along the line, students are going to kind of integrate all these little bits of knowledge that they're getting together into their heads. And of course some do, but most don't. And then you get industry screaming for good reason that we're not producing work-ready graduates. Now there are ways to get around this, and actually QUT's been working on this for quite a while, and that's also why the attrition rate has gone down. But as a general rule, people are not yet doing this. So it is certainly worth hammering away on this message. IT is a design discipline, and that affects its pedagogy and everything else that goes around it. So anyway, there we were, about there, 2004-5. those sorts of numbers, sitting around saying, what on earth can we do to improve our student numbers? So we did exactly what universities always do in this circumstance. We went to steal students from other universities. And there was only one problem with the strategy. Can anybody tell me what it is? They didn't have any students either, so there wasn't anything there to steal. And this illustrates an interesting psychological experiment that, and unfortunately I can't give you the exact citation, that was done with rats at some time in some university. And then basically they discovered that if you stick rats in an appropriately controlled environment and adjust their food source, they go through 3 distinct phase changes of behavior. If you give them too much food, they just ignore one another. They go and take what they want, build a little nest somewhere in this environment and live there quite happily. If you dial back the food to the point where it's just enough, just on the phase shift, rats demonstrate this really interesting behavior where they become much more social. So old sick rats get fed by young healthy rats and so on the phase shift. If you pull the food back further than that, the rats eat one another. Now, it's up to you to work out which of those 3 phases is a metaphor for the Australian university system today, and likely to become worse, I suspect. So attempting to poach each other's students is classic rats eating each other behavior, of course. So what we needed to do was find another way, and we found one, and I'm coming to that on probably the slide after this one. But just before I get there, along the way, we learned 4 really important lessons about how to do this kind of thing well. They're all really pretty counterintuitive, and we did a lot of stumbling around before we came across them. So I'll just explain briefly what each of these is. So the logic fallacy is the belief that you can reason somebody into deciding to choose a particular career. This is rubbish, right? Important decisions like relationships and careers are never based on something as irrelevant as logic. They're based on emotion. And once you've decided to make that decision, once you're hooked on a particular person or hooked in a particular career, then you come up with every rationalization in the world for why this is a good idea. But it's not how you get there in the first place. And so we're incredibly good at going out and telling people all the reasons why they should do stuff, and we're completely wasting our breath, because people don't listen to that kind of thing to begin with. The second fallacy is the band camp fallacy, and this is the kids who don't like making music never go to band camp, right? So you can run programs that are aimed at attracting people to study IT that are incredibly nerdy and IT specific. Programming boot camps, for example. And you can do an incredibly good job of these things. And the kids who go can love it, but it's going to have no impact on your student numbers at all, because the only kids who come to things like that are kids who are already interested. If you want to grow a pie, you've got to reach out beyond the boundaries of your current pie to get to make things bigger. The third fallacy, and no one in this room is going to like this one particularly, is the brand fallacy, and this amounts to university brands have negative value in the marketplace that we're talking about. And the reason for this is universities operate in a competitive economy. If you go into a school and say, I want you to come and study computer science or IT or mathematics or engineering or toenail cutting at my university, the students are all equipped at birth with a Babel fish. And that correctly translates to, I want you to give me your X money. And so the point of the message gets completely lost. They're not hearing what you think you're saying at all. Now, once they've made the decision to choose a particular career path, then where are they going to go and get the study? Of course, at that point, the university brand has enormous value, because at that point, you're making a competitive decision between, let's say, the 3 big unis in Brisbane. But we confuse those things. We imagine that the you've made a career choice, come to our university message, and the you should study this as a particular career message are the same message, and they aren't. And boy, did we waste a lot of time and energy before we figured that one out. And the last thing is the content. If you're trying to get somebody effectively emotionally engaged in a field that they're a little on the edge of, detailed description of the first 6 weeks of, let's say, first-year chemistry is not really exactly the right information to be conveying to them at that time. And that could be first-year computer science or statistics or whatever as well. And this is another mistake we make. We think, we'll open up the Pandora's box and give them all the gory detail of what we do in our university degree. They will find this very attractive. I don't think so. So, what can we do that's new? Well, the first new thing that we did was we decided to all work together rather than trying to eat each other's bodies. And so we got originally just the first 3 Brisbane universities together, UQ, QUT and Griffith. We got some support from the state government, and we got great support from industry and industry associations, and particularly John Patek, who's here today, who was a great booster of this program in the beginning. So that was the first thing, getting a group of people to agree to put aside their traditional boundaries and differences and work together in the argument that it's better to have a smaller slice of a bigger pie than a larger slice of nothing. That sort of thinking was actually strategically sensible for us. The second thing that we did was we decided to really hone in on the question of what an IT career was and what it was that you did in it. And in this we actually copied Engineers Australia, because they've been running a program like this earlier to get more people interested in engineering, and it was working. So we did what all great composers did. We stole the idea and said, well, if it's working for engineering, why the hell shouldn't it work for IT? Let's just give it a go. And we called this effort Group X, and you can ask me why if you're that interested later. And so we produced things like this. This is the career wheel. It was invented in concept by Peter Grant, who until recently was the Queensland Government Chief Information Officer. And it's basically intended to convey the message that there are more things to IT than just programming. One of the things we realized was that there's this very narrow perception of what you actually do as an IT professional, and it's sort of summed up as the beige guy in the beige cubicle writing COBOL. And that's actually only a very small part of the job, and of course for those people who actually choose to spend their careers that way, they're doing it because they choose to spend their careers that way, not because that's the only option available. Similarly, the dopey kid in an anorak who comes into your classroom to fix your kids' computers and only earns $35,000 a year is actually not at the pinnacle of that profession. And amazingly, this is very surprising to parents, because they have a very, very poor perception of what IT does. One of the reasons for this is that information technology is not verbable. Architect, computer science, doctor, all of those words are both nouns and verbs. And so it leads people to believe that they think they understand. I actually think that understanding is no better than the understanding of IT. But it's sufficiently good to let people make these career choices. And it's obviously sufficiently in the right direction that a reasonable number of those people then go on. But with IT, that just doesn't exist. It's just information technology. Huh? So, the interesting thing about this picture is that it's all wrong. And it's very bad. Matt Barry might have seen, some of you might have seen a LinkedIn blog article by Matt Barry earlier this year where he just excoriated all of this. But he completely missed the point. The detail is almost totally irrelevant. It's the bulk piece of information that says there's actually choice and career path here. And people go, wow, I had no idea that that was true. As it happens, it's not really wrong. This ended up being made increasingly sophisticated by HR inside the Queensland government. So it's a faithful representation of what career paths look like if you're an IT professional working in public works for the Queensland government 4 years ago. So they actually really do have benefits analysts and purchasing managers and some of the other slightly weird things that are on this diagram. But that's not a common IT job at all. So in a while I'll talk about what we're doing about that problem. But the thing is, just simple bits of information that allowed people to see what it was what the alternatives were, and the key things are actually, and they chose these really terrible names. Peter had much better names like build technology, work with people, solve user problems, things like that. But they got sort of crunched into things like enterprise governance and enterprise implementation, and so on. And to be honest, I couldn't really explain what those mean either. But maybe Michael can, because he comes from the information systems school. So we set out to talk to school kids, and what we did was we got each uni and the state government to put in a little bit amount of money. I think it's $40,000 each. Queensland government kicks in a little bit more, and that gave us a pool of around $200,000, which was enough money to hire a project officer, pay for a bunch of travel, and fund the printing of a certain amount of collateral, and do a little bit of maintenance on the website that is put up there. So we see somewhere between 20 and 40,000 students every year. And we do this by taking advantage of something that's almost unique to Queensland, and it's the Career Expo Network. So there's this thing that a company called Interchange run. It's TS Expo and the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast Expos. You've probably all been to them and done things, but it doesn't exist in New South Wales. So what we did was, it's quite simple actually. You hire a booth and you pay the fee, and somebody else takes care of all the other rubbish. They book the room, they make sure the internet connection is there, they put up the pipe and drape. You just got to show up and do your bit. So that's huge. We actually had an ecosystem in Queensland that we could leverage. We also contacted just about every school in Queensland and asked if we could come visit, and we only got a small number of replies, and they all said no. But we do actually engage with schools now. So we started going to all these places, and what happens at most of them, not TS Expo, but all the others, is kids get busted. So it's during the week, and it's during school time, and you're up in Rockhampton, and you're standing there, and boom, a load of kids arrive from Random High, and with their teachers. And then you get talking to the teachers, and they're just fascinated that you're actually not there to sell them any study. Everybody else is trying to sprick them, come to my university. We're saying, nah, we're not doing that. We just want you to know about IT careers. We just want you to know about what's possible. And the teacher goes, oh, that's really interesting. Can I have some pens and rulers? Can I take some of a whole bunch of those things to give out to my kids? Which uni would you recommend? Obviously, if you're in Cairns, you say JCU, right? If you're in Brisbane, you say, oh, well, they're all good, go check them out. But they say, come back and visit my school. Can you come talk at my school? Can you come to careers nights? Can you do this, that, and the other thing? And so you build a network over time. So now we get far more requests to go to schools than we could actually support. But it was good that it happened that way, bottom up and organically, because we were never pushing ourselves down their throats. We have, obviously haven't put all the stuff up that we use, but basically it breaks down into low-value, high-interest collateral. This is stuff kids love. Rulers, pens, yo-yos. But the key thing is they've all got the URL on them, right? And then high-value, low-interest stuff, like the career wheel. Yeah, don't really want one of those. Well, you better take it or we're not giving you the ruler. Okay. And we also run competitions for things like iPads, and that allows us to collect tons of demographic data. So we know, for example, that when we started, about 80% of the people we spoke to were male and about 20% were female. And now it's just under 50-50. So we can see shifting trends and interests as a result of that. We know, for example, that you don't actually get to talk to as many year 11 and 12 kids as these things as you'd like. You talk to a hell of a lot more year 10s. And in fact, what that really brought home a message that we should all know, which is if you wait until year 11 and 12, it's really far too late. Kids are a long way down the decision-making track. They've made, not only in terms of subject choices, but just in terms of a general mindset about the kinds of things they'd like to study. So it's really important that we're engaging it, at least in upper primary and lower high school. Obviously, you need to talk to year 11 and 12 kids as well, but if you make that your only market, you're kind of missing out quite a bit. We've got this website, about 30,000 people visit it a year. And it's not a great website, I should say. And that's one of the other things we're going to fix. But again, it provides sufficient information to give people an idea of what's possible. We support a whole bunch of engagement activities, which I'll come to in a little bit. And we support the annual IT Teachers Conference. You know, and that's been an interesting relationship because when it started, the association was very unsure what to make of us. You know, hello, we want to give you money and we want to hang out, but we really don't want anything else. You know, people are so used to being used that they didn't get it. But now we're a principal sponsor every year, and they've learned that really, as long as we can just talk to your members, that's fine. And it's a great vector to teachers. You get tons of teachers. And it's weird. The first year I saw this, I thought that, you know, basically teachers became infantile after spending too much time with their kids. But you go along to this and you have a bucket of pens or rulers, and a teacher would just grab this enormous handful. And you think they're demonstrating this really childish behavior. But actually it turns out these things are fantastic discipline weapons. The teachers want a whole bunch of rulers because they can say, sit down and I'll give you a ruler. And apparently this works. The kids go, all right. You know, so now I don't think it's infantile anymore. But it just goes to show, from an ethnographic point of view, about how you should never jump to conclusions about the behavior of a strange tribe until you've had enough time to hang out with them to actually understand why it is that they're doing the things that they're doing. Now, has this had any impact? Well, we're the blue line. This is offers for places in tertiary IT study in Queensland since 2007, and these are percentages. So since 2007, the number of offers has gone up by 80%. And there's been a very significant increase in the quality. Nobody's dropped their quality cutoffs in this time, and quite a few places have increased them. The gold line is what's happened in the rest of the country when you take the Queensland numbers out. So you can see that small uptick that was happening in nationally is actually all captured here. The purple line is all FOEs nationally, and the green and red lines are what's happening to national and Queensland all FOEs, because we were interested to see whether or not we were just simply riding a rising tide. And what we've been able to work out is, obviously there's some element of rising tide in there, but we've managed to cut well above the trend lines. So that all makes us very happy. Okay, so it works. And then Stephen Conroy got to find out about it, and he said, how about I give you some money? And we said, yes. And he said, how much do you want? And we quoted him a figure, and he said, oh, no, you've got to have more than that. So we were very happy when that worked out. So we got $6.5 million from DBCDE to take what we're doing and go national. But, of course, it's also important to bear in mind that there's tons of good stuff happening everywhere else as well. So it's also about helping those good things to grow and scale too. So this is a national project to increase the number of tertiary graduates. We're doing three things, right? We're proselytizing IT careers, which I've spoken about. We're going to be getting much, much more into supporting engagement activities. Now, the difference here comes back to this logic fallacy thing. Although, for many people, it seems, information about careers and jobs is a hook in itself. It's not good enough to just tell people that there are good jobs here. One way to think of this is about accountancy versus creative industries. All right? There was a time when IT had the job attractiveness of accountancy and the glamour of creative industries. What does this mean? I hope there are no accountants here or watching the YouTube video. If you are, just block your ears for a minute. But accounting has to be the most boring thing in the universe that you could imagine doing. And yet, every year, there's no shortage of people who want to study accounting at universities, right? Because there are a whole bunch of people who fully understand this, but for them, things like job security and a steady career and so on are really important. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? So, for these people, that track works well. Similarly, there's no shortage of people who want to study the creative industries, especially, for example, at QUT, where the most difficult degree to get into is fine arts acting. And my nephew, who got into it a few years ago, is living proof of exactly what I'm going to say now, which is you can get into this incredibly difficult degree and graduate very well and then spend the rest of your life as a cocktail waiter. And he was perfectly happy to do that because for him, the chance of the shot of glory outweighed the risk of being unemployed. Right? And he's part of that whole Gen Y up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. No sense at all that things like security are something you should worry about because mum and dad will just take care of it sort of generation. Mum and dad are completely disinterested in this. But what's the point? The point is IT used to have the job security of accounting and the excitement and glamour of the creative industries, and when the dot-com bust happened, in the minds of the public, those two got switched around. And having incredibly boring jobs with no job security is not really the message that we want to be out there sending. So it's also important that we convey information about what the hell it is you actually do in this profession. And it turns out that there are a wealth of really interesting non-band camp activities where people are trying to reach out to a broader community and get those kids interested in studying IT. And I do have a video, but I'll finish the talk and play it at the end just to make sure that we have enough time of one of these activities. So that's the point of the engagement. Many more things that are like, for example, the robotics programs that Chris Chalmers here works on and so on, designed to get kids to capture and hold their interest. And not only just one or two of them, but you need a lot because you need to engage kids over several years. There's a great program called RoboCup, and one of the things they do with kids in primary school is they get them to build little dancing robots. And if you've ever seen this, it's really cool. But if that's all they do, what have they learned? They've learned that IT was something you did in year 5. And that's not really quite the message that's being intended to be sent. So it's important you can keep them engaged. And so that's this bullet over here. And then, with part of this money, we're going to start getting much more serious about what can we do to help teachers to improve the quality of their teaching in the classroom. So we have a national committee that's got all these acronyms on it, as well as a representative of each state committee and key industry sponsors. And then there's a committee in each state that take care of the technical business of running activities in each state. And all the unis in Australia just about are partners at the state level. And state governments and local industry and people like that tend to get involved as well. So it's one of these cat herding consortia, which is designed to make sure that if on a Thursday night I'm feeling like watching television, there'll always be something else to worry about. So these are the kinds of things we do. We support career fairs, which we've spoken about. Things called Big Days In, which are one-day activities that the ACS Foundation started that will now sponsor. School visits, we'll have a network of people to do those. There's a whole online site to this. The content and stuff that we have has grown in a kind of higgledy-piggledy fashion. It's not quite where we need it to be at the moment, so quite a serious investment in redeveloping that stuff. More of a social media presence, and I can't overestimate the importance of curation. I won't go into the details now, ask me over a beer later, but if you don't hire people whose job it is to actually keep curating the things that you put up, especially in the social media space, please don't bother, because you're just doing yourself a big damage. But if you go there, make sure you can invest in the people. Otherwise, really bad things happen. Think 4 years of Viagra ads sitting on a website aimed at kids, and you get the idea. That wasn't us. Okay, then all these activities like Young ICT Explorers and RoboCup and Excite Camps and First Lego League, all of which are computing-focused activities designed to get kids more interested. Club Kidpreneur is this lovely program that started in Sydney that's aimed at getting young kids to become more entrepreneurial. And although it doesn't relate directly to IT, we thought it was important to get involved with this because entrepreneurial is a part of the mindset shift that we're trying to make happen. National Computer Science Summer School is an activity out of Sydney that's kind of a finishing camp for nerds. It's a very, very good advanced programming course, but it's very much in the band camp space. You're not going to draw more people in, but once you've drawn them in through the other activities, you can maintain and lock down their interest. And as you all know about ACARA, right? The Australian Council for something Association. Australian Curriculum and Reporting
association, I think. Authority, or even more important. But they have a subgroup that's working on the new digital technologies curriculum, which is marvelously seditious because it teaches, it takes a design-led approach to introducing all this stuff into schools, which I think is just great. And we're working with various partners to make sure that the teachers and students have the resources that they need to be able to take full advantage of the national curriculum. We really do need to think about this business of the tertiary curriculum. And I won't spend a lot of time on this now, partially because I'm babbling on too long anyway, but partially because QUT has already done this to a very significant extent. But this shift to teach like design. Now, of course, if you look at things like the MIT CDIO engineering program, they've actually made this shift in engineering as well. So it's not that unique, but it's really about thinking about a degree that has a studio-type spine, employs an inverted curriculum, uses flipped classroom methodology, and those three things, by the way, are not three different ways of saying the same thing. They refer to quite different aspects of the way you teach, and all of them, I think, need to be deployed to have the full impact. The old faculty of IT was just marvelously full of young staff who got very enthusiastic about this and made really good things happen, and I'm very grateful to all of them. And the impact, and QUT demonstrates this impact, is more attractive degrees, help to attract more students, and result in much, much lower attrition. So I think all of that has really worked out pretty well. Now I think QUT actually has a kind of religious mission to go out and engage with other universities and help them to understand how to do this as well. And Glenn Stewart, are you here anywhere, Glenn? Has been helping me a bit with that, and I'm very grateful because although it's not really formally part of Group X's job, because we interact with all the unis, it does give us a sort of neutral platform to help encourage people to work together. And by and large, I find when unis are not in the same catchment, so they're not competing for the same students, pretty good about supporting one another, and that's to be applauded. So I think I've already discussed this. So let's turn to STEM then for just a few minutes, and ask the question, do we think we've learned things that are universal, that can be applied beyond just IT to engineering, to science, to maths? And I think the answer is yes, but you've got to be a little bit careful in how you do that. And also, you need to think about this as much more a set of ideas than a fully fledged program, because obviously everything I'm about to say now we haven't actually done. So there's several ways to come at this, and this is a fairly simple one. IT is always engaged in another field. In fact, it's probably not wrong to say that IT must be the most inherently uninteresting field in the history of fields, because at some level you can do nothing with it. The only way it becomes useful is if you've got a problem to apply it to. So IT becomes interesting when it engages with business, when it engages with science, when it engages with engineering. Otherwise, it's just not. So all of the time we are effectively pointing at those engagements, and that's obviously one simple way to help get people more interested in more than just IT. If we're talking about IT and engineering or IT and science, we're selling multiple disciplines simultaneously, so that's a good thing. And obviously we should do more of that. So we think that the emotional hook around IT is actually very job-related for a lot of people. Obviously, they're on the accountant side of that spectrum, I articulated, and this doesn't work. One of the things we've learned this year is that although we've had success, we don't think we've been engaging enough with the people who are on the sort of entrepreneurial risk-taker end, and we need to do better at that. But the emotional hook, if the emotional hook's around jobs, the irony, of course, is that there's so many people who think there aren't any jobs, and yet once you get them turned on, then they find exactly the opposite. But for other fields, I don't think that a job-based push is a really smart thing to do. There are more IT jobs than any other kind of job in Australia at the moment, so that's a safe message to send. There are only 500 science jobs at the moment. If you're going to want to persuade people to do science as a career, saying there's tons of jobs when you graduate strikes me as being a little bit disingenuous. So you've got to find other ways to create that engagement. At the same time, I should point out, and Stephen Walker, who's the Dean of Science at UQ, has done a marvelous brochure where he's taken a whole bunch of UQ alumni and tracked where they've actually gone. And of course, these people have gone everywhere. You know, they're running giant corporations and radio stations and God knows what the hell else. So, in truth, a good grounding in science, because it teaches you to think well and so on, prepares you for all kinds of careers. And that's one place we can go, is just making that information a little bit more broad. And of course, breaking down that link for that particular thing just with one university and having a much more general message. So I really think the interest in science is all about joy, beauty, and enthusiasm, and I'm not being facetious when I say this. I think there's a fantastic... We know, more or less, that when kids are in primary school, they love science. Right? At some point as they get to high school, that interest wanes. It wanes very quickly when science becomes mathematized. Because suddenly it goes from being a joy, beauty, and wonder field to a kind of dry, dusty, make sure you get all the steps in the calculation exactly right or you fail kind of field. And obviously that doesn't appeal to a whole bunch of people. So, are there ways that we can retain that sense of joy, beauty, and enthusiasm? And I think the answer is yes. A few years ago, some of us at QUT came up with this idea for what we called the Science Lab of the Year. And this never really went anywhere at the time, but I'm still thinking about it. And the idea is to use the internet and the cloud to make it possible for high-quality science experiences to be experienced anywhere, either in the curriculum or in an extracurricular way. I say here, avoid the science in a box problem. When I worked at the University of Illinois, the NCSA, the supercomputing people, put together, and I was sort of involved in this, we put together a science in a box, right? It was a big tarball, to get all techie for a moment, that you could download and install on your school's computers, and it had simulations and visualizations and other kinds of really cool things that kids could use, and it was an abject failure. And basically the reason why it was an abject failure is because this tarball never worked anywhere. So, you know, every school had different networks or different computers or different versions of this, that, and the other, so this damn thing just would hardly ever download and install. And schools, by and large, had neither the personnel nor the expertise nor the time to try and work out why the heck this thing isn't working properly. So it was a brilliant idea, but just before its time. But when you've got the internet and the cloud, you don't have to push anything out anymore, do you? Because all the computation and so on can happen somewhere that you've taken the time and trouble to set up. And as long as people have the simple front-end app or the website or whatever it is that you need, and those things can be made highly portable, then it's easy for people to engage. So this is very MOOC-like, right? Because you're building online experiments and online data capture and things like that. And probably you're whacking in a whole bunch of lectures and a social network and all the other things that a good MOOC will do well. But you're not really aiming it as being a massively open course. You're creating more a family of resources that other people can then embed in the training that they want to do. And a perfect illustration of this is the Atlas of Living Australia. Hands up if you looked at the Atlas of Living Australia. Yeah, that's about right. That's the same reaction we get anyway. This is a fantastic thing. Go look at it. Those of you who got your computers open can Google it right now. It was funded out of NCRIS. And what they did was they built this fantastic, big, scalable back-end for natural science. And then they started combining together all the information that all the various museums, like the Queensland Museum and friends around the country actually held. And so you can go on there and you can say, show me all the sightings of one-eared koalas over the last 50 years, and boom, it'll pop them up. But then, and this is the really fun and interesting bit, you can start layering your own data in on top of it. So you can get a class of kids and you can get them to go study the incidence of cane toads in their backyards. Does anything other than cane toads even live in backyards anymore? Well, let's pretend for the moment this rich fauna that they can go out and engage with and record these things and take pickies or whatever and geocode the pictures and load it all up. And the great thing about this is the Atlas will automatically sieve out the kiddie data from the professional data, although we know from things like Wikipedia that actually the citizen science stuff in the aggregate is probably going to be pretty close in quality to the stuff that you get from the pros as well. And then you can go in other directions. The Queensland Museum has something like 1 million exhibits that have never been curated. They're not really sure what they are. They're lying in dusty boxes. We're not using the collective power of our society to actually help with those problems. It's perfect and hardly anybody uses it. It's just a tragedy, right? But we could build science experiences and we could take advantage of things like that which make it really cheap for us to do it, because we don't need $20 million to build a giant back-end that takes care of all the data curation and what's the word, provenance management and all those other things, because, hey, they've already done it for us. And then what could we do with that to create marvelous experiences? And the answer is, I don't have a clue, but I bet you it's a lot if we put our mind to it. Yeah, of course we can link that together. And now I'm winding down. The future for universities is probably quite bleak, right? There are big changes afoot. I like using the car industry, global car industry, as a metaphor for what is probably going to happen to unis over the next 20 years. And every time I do this, somebody says, oh, but cars are products and we're providing a service and so it's different. No, it's not. And you just need to keep thinking about it or ask me questions until you understand why. And there are more brands of cars sold now in Australia than any time before. In fact, I think Australia may have the largest variety of cars sold of any nation in the world. But basically, only one of them is made here. So it's not like fantastic high-quality tertiary education experiences aren't going to exist for our students. The question is, where are they going to come from and what will happen to the academy in this shift? Because the academy is enormously important. We are all enormously important. We're continuously engaged in the good work of creating next generations of leaders and thinkers for our country. I would hate to see that die. And it's going to come under really significant threat. MOOCs are just a harbinger. And if we're going to survive, we're most certainly not going to survive by holding to the old defensive attitudes, which put competition first and things like this. We really, really need to work together. And something like the Science Lab of the Year and Group X, these things create possibilities for organizations to work together for a greater good. And what we've demonstrated is we can do more together than we can do individually, and that all of us can benefit as a result of that. You know, if you wanted to go out, if after today QUT said, we like the Sloter idea, we should actually do something about it, we could make it an iffy project or something like that, and QUT didn't want to do it alone, 90% of the good reasons for doing it died on the word alone. It's got to be collaborative. No one organization can possibly think that it has all the answers. Actually, of course, many organizations think they have all the answers, but they're just delusional. And I would hate QUT to be that way, because I know you're not. So, I love this picture. Those people who are asking me about what's happening with NICTA's funding, because you may have heard that the day before the election, the Commonwealth, the coalition announced they were closing us down. Well, our boss went and had a meeting with the relevant ministers yesterday, and he said, when he came back, he said, I can't tell you what was discussed in this meeting, but I'm going to show you this picture. So we all felt much happier after that. So thank you very much for your attention, and happy to take questions.